Hello, this online lecture will run through the site plan component of Assessment 2. The site plan is a two-dimensional representation of our site as well as the surrounding area, and it forms the basis for which you can put your 1 to 100 models in context. Where will you put this in your presentation in week 4? So the idea is that this will be on an A3 plinth or a board, and that you'll be able to sit it onto your table, and that you will then be able to get some of your building models here with your design proposals, and you'll be able to put those into the site. In terms of how much of the context to show and where you should show, the dashed red line here on the screen gives you an indication. So I don't want the model to be any bigger than A3, and that just makes it easy in terms of getting a plinth that's kind of a standard size. You should be showing, as you can see here, some of the footpath and road here, given that that's a part of the site that we're looking at. Some of the garage, the adjacent tobacconist, and the adjacent property. So if you can get those 4 components into your model, that's important because they all impact upon the building and the way that you'll create design proposals in the building. To recap, the idea is that each of your 1 to 100 building models will be able to put in and out of the site plan. And the reason for this is that in this course, we're really investigating the idea of place and site and thinking quite specifically about how our design decisions and our design proposals might relate to the morphology of the surrounding site or the form, the light, noise, social movements and behaviours, and other aspects that you will have researched and made in your site studies. So we can see here then that what you'll end up with is an A3 site plan as a panel of some sort, and that would be the red dashed line. And then you'll have your 1 to 100 models that you can pop into the site plan. So how much detail do you need to show on a site plan? Well, site plans vary because they can be really big in scale, so 1 to 100,000 or 1 to 50,000 for large urban and landscape plans, down to a very small scale such as the one that we're working on in this interior architecture project. Some general principles are that you can show surrounding buildings as kind of massed blocks, that we then show the site that we are focusing on in a little bit more detail, and as your proposal evolves, you'll start to show that. We need to show surrounding urban elements as simple lines and shapes. So that would be things like the footpath, the edge of the curb, the road, trees, the telegraph poles, the phone booth, etc., etc. And many of these components you picked up on in the site analysis that we did in week 1 in the site visit. And so the other component is the titling of the page. So remember that you need to title. So you'll say site plan or site map. You need to show the scale, which will be 1 to 100, and you need to indicate a north point. and then think about the typography of these elements, the symbols used in these elements, and the composition of those alongside the site plan itself on your A3 panel. Here are some examples of site plans and some points for consideration. So if we have a look at the first image, this is a Nolli map. And Nolli looked really at figure-ground relationships, so at relationships between positive or built space and negative or unbuilt space, but also at differences between public space and private space. So you start to see how maps can show different aspects of the built environment and of cities. If we have a look a little bit more technically, you can see that positive private spaces are shown as hatched in dark grey, and at your negative, more public spaces, even though often they're interiors, as white. Nolli also notes roads and buildings as well as building numbers, and so this is something that you might consider including in your site plan. If we have a look at the next image, again, it's about figure-ground relationships and also about built form versus natural forms of trees or landscape. And so we start to differentiate the buildings from the trees and the surrounding buildings from the proposed buildings that are being worked on. So we can see that there's a difference shown through tones of grey as well as through different hatching styles. If we have a look at the last image, again you start to see that we look at the macro context, the surrounding buildings, the roads, the footpaths, the landforms and the trees. We start to zoom in through shading and then zoom in again through tone and colour to focus on the building that is being worked on. So I'd urge you to think about the graphic techniques to communicate the kind of key information of the site that we are examining. Some examples, if we now look to kind of built up elements of the site plan, which is what you're being asked to do in this assessment. So the first image shows how you can layer cardboard and you can cut into cardboard to show, you see here, sidewalks as well as survey plots and the buildings themselves. The second image uses laser cut or etched perspex. And we can see here that the buildings have been added in, so that's what you can do with your models. The third image is probably plywood or pine, and again that's been etched with the building then added on. This is where I would encourage you to use the Design Futures Lab and the various maker spaces. So I think there's 5 or 6 of them across the campus to start to experiment with materials and material technologies in starting to form and represent your design propositions. We can also include other pieces of information in our site plans, and we can go beyond the boundaries of what we might typically show in a site plan. So Diller and Scofidio on the left here look at a plywood panel painted and then drawn, the floor plan drawn onto this, with a drawing implement used to show how the space of this proposition was actually formed as a radius. James Corner on the right starts to show rail networks through graphic and diagrammatic elements that sit outside of the site plan itself. So we are very open to you taking a more abstract approach in your site plan and in communicating some of the key aspects of the site that you have researched from week 1 to week 3.